Hey everybody, so I wanted to shoot some video to show you guys an actual complete teardown of the knife I've been working on, show you exactly all the different components that are inside, how it's constructed, so you know how they can be taken down, put back together, and maintained, stuff like that. So that's what we're going to cover in this video. Hope you enjoy.
I know it seems bad now, always another way out. I know that you can find a way.
Okay, so in this video, I'm going to use the prototype that I've been carrying around. You can see this one's kind of getting some wear on it, which is good. I've been carrying it every day and using it as needed. So far it's been performing really well for me. Got no complaints. Yeah, so this one's got a little bit of use on it, so let's break it down and you can see exactly how I'm constructing this and all the different components. Okay, the first thing that we're going to do, and the first thing that you can understand about this knife, is you can actually break everything down from the back side. So that's the opposite. This is the presentation side. We're going to go to what I call the back side. That's the side where the pocket clip resides. So to start off, I'm going to use a T6 Torx, or actually there you go, a T6 Torx screwdriver will fit the pocket clip screws. All of the small hardware on this knife uses a T6. So those two screws removed there, we can get the pocket clip off. This is one of the titanium pocket clips. I'm actually still working on the design for this. So we're going to set that aside for now. And that exposes the scales to where we can get to the 4 scale mounting screws and the pivot. So the pivot in the design for this knife actually rests on a counterbore that is in the scales. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the knife and I'm going to lay it face down to where I'm looking at that back side, and I'm going to start by taking the pivot out. So I will remove the pivot screw. Now all of the screws in the knives, I use a thread locker on it. It's not a Loctite, it is another thread locker that I will put the information, you'll get the information as to what thread locker it is that I'm using. It works really well and it allows for multiple assembly and disassembly kind of takedowns, if you will, of the knife before it needs to be replaced. So with the main pivot screw out, I will now remove the 2 T6, and I didn't mention the Torx on the pivot is a T10. So removing the 2 screws from there allows me to remove the handle scale. Now I'm going to pop the screws out there. And on the back of the scale for the back side there is a pocket. And you need to be careful at this stage because that pocket holds the spring for the button. So we'll set this right here by the screws. So we have our 2 handle scale screws. We've got our scale right here. Let me move all this back a little bit so you can see. We've got the 2 handle screws, we have the 2 pocket clip screws, and we have the button spring. All right, and we've got a little bit of oil on the titanium. I'm just gonna wipe that off. Okay, so that's going to expose the inner frame rail. So when you have the inner frame rail exposed like this one, you then remove the 2 standoff screws. Now all the small hardware on this knife is all 256, and they all use a T6 size Torx driver. So with those two screws removed, we can now carefully, because the blade's sharp, remove the backside frame rail. So in this backside frame rail, we have the backside, or what I refer to as the bottom side button hole. We have a hole that doesn't go all the way through that is for the stop pin. And then we have our coil spring pocket. And that pocket is used to retain part of the coil spring. That leaves us with the actual presentation side frame of the knife. The coil spring resides inside a pocket that is half inside the blade and half inside the frame. So there's our coil spring. I'm going to set it aside. Okay, so now we have just the blade with the button. The button's not retained. There is a washer or a bushing that sits on this pivot right here in the spring pocket. And I'm going to remove that bushing so that we don't lose it. So there we go, flip it over. And in this particular case, the button also came out when I flipped it over. You'll see there's a shoulder on that button, if I can get it to focus here. Focus on the button. Okay, so, excuse me, we'll set that aside. So now I have the blade, the stop pin. I should be able to reach in and take the stop pin out. And I can sit here and work the blade, the pivot. I can push that pivot in and it will actually come out the other side. All right, so that separates the blade from our frame. On the back side of the blade, there's another bushing that rides up against the titanium. And we can take that bushing out as well. So that simply leaves us the main side or the presentation side of the frame. So this side here. And if we need to, we can remove these two screws. And just like on the back side frame, there are the two screws that go into the brass standoffs. And that can be removed as well. So assembly of this piece, you can either start one of the pivot screws into the actual pivot barrel. This one I'm just going to leave assembled for right now. There's no sense in taking it right back apart to put it right back together. So I'm going to put the pivot in, and then on that pivot I will set my bronze washer. It's the larger of the two bronze washers. After the washer goes on, I will put the stop pin into its pocket, and then I will set the button into its pocket. Okay. At this point, I can now take my blade and very carefully, you have to pick the button up just a little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but you don't take the button all the way out, but just pick it up a little bit to where it can tilt to the side, and then slide the blade down until you can slide it all the way down onto the washer, and then the button will go back into place. We then attach or put the washer back on the top side of the blade, and the coil spring has a little leg on it. I don't know if I can get this thing to focus here, but the little leg will fit through a hole in the bottom of that pocket on the blade. All right. The next step will be to simply lay the upper or the backside frame over the pivot, and you'll have to align the button, the back side or the bottom side of the button, to the hole that's cut in the frame for it, and then the stop pin itself. But this will not lay perfectly flat because the coil spring needs to be aligned with the pocket. Let's see if I can get the camera to see it. You can kind of see down in there that the coil spring is not aligned with the pocket in the frame. So let me show you that pocket in the frame one more time. So in the frame we have this leg in the titanium, and the coil spring has a leg sticking off of it, and those two do not match up perfectly, and that's on purpose. That leaves just a small amount of tension when it's fully opened, but not much tension at all. So we lay the frame over it, and then using a screwdriver or something that's very small, we hook on that coil spring and slide it over into that pocket. And as we do that, then the frame will fall down and lay flat. Okay. Once that has been completed, we will take, let's see, we'll take our two screws for the brass standoffs at the tail of the knife. And we will tighten those down. Okay. Next, we will put the button spring into the pocket of the button, and then take the back side scale. We'll line everything up and then reinsert the two scale screws. Okay, now at this point, before I put the pocket clip back on, I'm going to reinsert the pivot screw. You want to be kind of careful here because this is a really fine thread screw, and so it's easy to cross thread it. So you want to make sure that you take your time and get it started properly. Sorry, I'm trying to do this not really facing me so that the camera can see, but that's proving to make it a little difficult. Okay, now I'm going to leave that a little bit loose because the way that these work is you have the 3 points of contact. You may have seen me talk about this in my other videos. So the 3 points of contact are between the pivot, the button, and that stop pin that's in there. Now when the knife is closed, the contact is between the blade on the pivot and the button. When the blade opens, then the contact is made with the blade pivoting on the pivot and then pressed up against the stop pin in the back and the button falling into its recess in the blade. Now, if the pivot, the tension on the pivot is too loose, then you will have side-to-side play in the blade. If the pivot tension is too tight, then you won't have good deployment out of the knife. It will lock up. So I brought an extra one of the T10 Torx, and I'm actually going to tighten this down just a little bit so you guys can see that. So we can see what that looks like. Okay, so we can see the deployment now is still really good. I really don't have any side-to-side play. I don't feel any play in the mechanism, so to speak. And the deployment's pretty good. So let's tighten that down just a little bit more. And this is why I'm using such fine threaded screws for the pivot, because they allow really nice control over this adjustment. So now we can see it's actually kind of almost not deploying all the way. It's not snapping. It's just starting to snap all the way open, but it's definitely much slower as the friction is increased. And then if I just take it a little bit further, the blade's only going to partially deploy. So adjusting the pivot is kind of a critical step of getting proper tension and function out of, well, really any side swing automatic knife like this. So that one's just a little too tight yet. So I'm going to back it off just a little bit more. Now also, you know, putting oil on and everything will help the function of everything and moving slow. I mean, I wiped some of the oil off of this, so those washers are getting a little drier. But here we can have, you can see we have a nice even deployment. It's a solid lockup. There's no play that I'm feeling there, and it functions quite well. Now, if I like this to open faster, I can go ahead and loosen that pivot up just a little bit more, and it'll make it deploy faster. I tend to like mine right about where it is right now. Actually, it's a nice, even, smooth swing. Everything feels nice and crisp, and those washers inside, they do wear a little bit over time, not a lot, but using a good thread locking, now you don't want to use like a Loctite red. You could get away with using a blue, but that's a little overkill. A lot of people use the purple. The stuff that I'm using isn't actually a thread locker. I'm going to have to grab the bottle. I don't remember the name of it. It's I don't know. I'll dig it up and show you here. So once we have the pivot where we want it to be, I'll go ahead and close the knife. Now I can reattach the pocket clip. So I'll put each of my screws in there. And we'll get this lined up and put the screws in. Now, especially on an automatic knife like this, because of the snap of the blade opening, I definitely recommend using some sort of thread locker or you know, some sort of fluid to try to help keep those screws from backing out. You know, you can see this one has a little bit more of a crisp open to it, but it's got a little bit of play in it right now because of how loose it is, but it's a harder hit and a faster swing out. on the deployment. And again, that can be adjusted with just a little bit of tension on the pivot. All right, well, that's it for now, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you got questions, let me know. I appreciate you guys watching my videos and have an interest in what it is that I'm doing. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. Don't forget to like and share and let people know about what I'm doing. And I'll catch you later.